Good morning, everyone. It is me, Stephanie Van Vark, and I am back again today with Talking Business. I am a small business owner. So today we are talking to the executive director of the Historic Virginia Key Beach Park and Trust, Guy Forchion. I hope I said that right. Because it's a very interesting time when you look at historic venues, and I think he can speak to us a little bit about the importance of investing in our historic in our history. So without further ado, bringing on Guy Forchion. Hello there.
Hi, good morning. Hello. Hi, Stephanie. Good morning.
Thank you so much for agreeing to join us today.
No, more than happy to. Thank you.
So this is going to be a good show because I think this is a very interesting time we're living in right now. And I think definitely venues like yours can be at the forefront of helping to rectify some of those wrongs. But before we get ahead of ourselves, tell me who you are and what you do.
Sure. I'm Guy Fortune. I'm the executive director of the Virginia Key Beach Park Trust. And so the trust was created roughly 20 years ago to protect, restore, rebuild, and operate historic Virginia Key Beach Park. And that's 82 acres on the island of Virginia Key, the historic colored-only beach for Miami-Dade County.
Okay. So let's say I'm a first timer. I am not. I've been there. It's gorgeous. But I'm a first timer and I roll onto the grounds. What will I see? Give us a visual of what I'll see, what I'll experience.
Okay, let me paint this picture. So
Yes.
again, it's just it's 2 miles south of downtown Miami. So when you enter the Rickenbacker Causeway and come over the bridge, you get to one of the highest elevations in Dade County. And so you look out at a panoramic view of Miami. And so first of all, it's a beautiful journey. Okay, and I don't just say this to say we're the most beautiful beach because I think we are. But when you cross the bridge, you're on a journey. You're transporting yourself to a different place. And so when you come across onto Virginia Key, and that is the island, many people believe once they go across the causeway, they're in Key Biscayne. Mm-hmm. And that's not true. Mm-hmm. You drop onto Virginia Key. This is where the Seaquarium is. Uh-huh. This is where the Mast Academy is. Rusty Pelican. People know these places, the Marine Stadium. So all of those things are on the island of Virginia Key. And so when you go along the key, you'll get to the second traffic light, you'll make a left and you come down Virginia Beach Drive and enter the park. And it's a beautiful place that spans out. You don't directly see the seashore because we have built we have built in a coastal dune that is vegetated. So this beach is very natural. This is what you would see on a natural tropical island. Mm-hmm. So this is not adding sand and re-nourishing it and expanding it the way you see South Beach or Miami Beach or other beaches. This is like being on a tropical island. So it's a very short sandy shore with vegetation right behind you. Mm-hmm. You don't see any development. You look out to the east, out to the Atlantic Ocean from Bear Cut. And I say Bear Cut because right across the cut, you will see the island of Key Biscayne and you'll see the northern side of Crandon Park. Okay. So you're looking at the Key Biscayne Island across the shore of Virginia Key Beach. Now, once you roll onto the property, you will see a giant sand structure. It's about 35 feet tall. We had the world's tallest sand castle. World record height. And it was built roughly 4 years ago now. We had no belief, even the folks that built it didn't believe that it would last longer than a year. It lasted and looked fantastic for 2 years. Doesn't look as good as it used to now, but it's still an incredible monument. It was sculpted. And so you'll see that when you enter the park. But then there's all the historic elements that were here. The historic bathhouse, concession stand, the mini train, and I'll talk about that a little later in this discussion. The carousel and our offices are there. So we
Okay.
put on a number of different events. There are two massive lawns where you can have all sorts of concerts and events, much of what we did before COVID-19.
Right, right.
Okay, so we're
Yeah, we're gonna
experiencing
talk
a
about
different,
that for sure.
yeah, we're experiencing, we definitely have to, because it has changed the world. It has changed how people use
Mhm.
open spaces. But so, basically it's a staff of about 15 great people, and we make sure that the history of this island, the courageous acts that African Americans made in 1945 to
Mhm.
hold this place for people of color, we make sure that that stays alive, and that their work, their courageous act has allowed the entire public to experience this place today.
So let me ask you, the vegetation, you talk about it being a small beach and vegetation very indicative of a tropical island. Was that what it looked like in 1945, and have you aspired to, in your restoration, recapture a lot of that look and feel of the colored beach at that time?
The beach at the time, no, it was not. It was a sandy beach filled with coconut palm.
Okay.
It is now largely populated with native plants. And when I
Okay.
say that, coconut palm trees technically are not a native species to
Okay.
South Florida. And
Okay.
that might sound completely crazy,
Right.
because we have coconut trees all over. I have one in my front lawn
We
at
just did.
home.
We
Okay,
just
so they're
did.
all over.
Right.
But it's, you know, through years of hurricanes, most of those coconut palms that were on the shore had been destroyed.
Right.
And so I've got to go through a little bit of history here. This park was created in 1945, but at the end of segregation, people of color, Black people, stopped coming to this beach. They started going to every beach, Crandon, Hallover, South Beach, wherever they wanted to go. And it was a county property then, and was allowed to fall into disrepair. So it spent 26 years closed to the public, from 1982 to 2008. In that quarter century, weeds and exotic plants grew over the entire property. So it looks nothing like it did in 1945, nor does it look how it did when we entered the property around 2003, 2004 to start restoring it. It was a completely overgrown space.
Okay. So what?
Decayed.
Okay.
Parking lot was destroyed.
Okay.
Yes.
No, I wanted to ask, so what kind of, when it was a colored only beach, obviously African Americans visited here, but what type of families? Were they affluent? Were they, working class? Everybody sort of in the same spot enjoying this experience? And what are some of the memories that you've heard that have come out of those moments?
Yeah, the beauty of the park is that it brought everyone together. Affluent, working class, poor, it did not matter. This was based on color. And so this was Overtown, Coconut Grove, Liberty City, Brownsville, those neighborhoods, everyone came to the park. Okay. So there are pictures, after church, buses and trucks would bring people. So everyone came to the park. And, those are some of the things that make such an incredible, rich history. This wasn't one segment of people. This wasn't the affluent spot. This was everyone's spot. Okay. And also there were quite a few Hispanic people that came to this park. Again, it was based on your color, based on whether or not a person was light enough to pass.
Right.
Okay. And so Crandon Beach was the white beach, and right across Bear Cut was the black beach.
Okay.
So there are a lot of stories I've gotten from Hispanics whose parents and grandparents who came in the 50s, some could only come to this park and were welcomed.
Right.
And they were welcomed. So it's amazing stories of fellowship, of people trading food, talking amongst one another. I mean, you saw your neighbor at the beach. You saw your neighbor at church, and then later in the day, you saw your neighbor recreating.
Right.
And it brought everyone. I mean, stars, MLK was here.
Nice.
If you were performing, if you were performing on Miami Beach, and as a Black entertainer, you could not stay overnight on Miami Beach. You could not go in the ocean on Miami Beach. So what did you do? You stayed at the hotels in Overtown on Third Ave.
Right.
And if you wanted to recreate, you came over to the beach and got some sun and fun. So everyone who performed in the Jackie Gleason days of Miami Beach then stayed in Overtown and recreated on the park.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the business side of, as you mentioned earlier, this is a venue, as you mentioned, I've been to several times with concerts, special events, just coming to see the place and space. Prior to the pandemic, were those your primary methods of revenue and income, or can you speak to how does the park itself generate revenue for itself?
And thank you. And when you asked me to come on to this show and it was about businesses, I know most people are probably thinking, what does the trust have to do with some business? It's a government entity.
It's business.
Well, it is business, and it's very unique too, because when the project started, the city paid for the operation of the beach. It paid for the staff. In 2010, at the recession, the economic meltdown, the city stopped funding the trust completely.
Oh.
So from 2010 to 2017, the park completely operated on revenues we generated, 100%. And so we opened this space in February 2008. There was no entry fee for vehicles. Again, it's a public park, and we still feel this way today. This is a public park. And so to pay to enter your public park is not something that is in the mentality of my board and myself in this public space. This is for everyone.
Right.
But in 2010, when all funds were removed, and I'm talking about a place that had a staff of roughly 24, was reduced really to 5 people and no revenue. So more than $1 million given to the trust each year for staff to 0. And so we instantly knew we would have to do, to 0.
Right.
So we knew we would have to do some things very different in order to survive. We began an entry for vehicles, and today it's $5 in weekdays and $8 on weekends.
Okay.
Picnic pavilions, you can rent the pavilions. They're $250. We don't double book them, so you have them all day. So families can really do all sorts of activities, different corporate partners that hold activities for their staff come out. Churches will rent the locations, family reunions. I mean, once people knew the park was open, it was difficult having been closed for 26 years, and then it opens. It takes years to get people to know you're even open.
Right.
And so once we got over that hill, I think we started to get a lot more activity. And then large events began to come in, concerts and different things of that nature. And in that regard, it's an amazing outdoor space. It's an amazing natural space. So the Marley Festival was here. And you may know, just a couple years ago, Ultra was here. Okay.
Yeah, I heard that.
I think even more on a global. Yeah, Ultra came, and that put us on a global map.
I've been to the soul food.
So,
I think you had a soul food.
A lot of the world is exposure.
Yeah, yeah,
Sure,
yeah,
soul food came. Um, we have a
yeah.
lot. The grassroots festival of music and dance made us their winter home, and so they were
Okay,
here for 7
okay.
years. And so, we try to have a wide variety of things that take place here. We welcome everything and all groups. And so I think
Mhm.
we've been very successful there, but we work very hard to make sure that when you visit the place, it's inviting, it's welcoming, it's beautiful as a
It
natural
is.
space,
It is.
educational, and we're working now to make sure on the property that there's signage and that helps fill you in on the nature and the history of the beach. The idea is
Okay.
that you would come here, enjoy yourself, but you will know you were at a very important place in the civic activism realm of Miami. This was a big success story of civic activism. I mean, folks waded in at Hallover Beach, hoping to be arrested to bring attention to the injustice of segregation in 45, basically 15, 20 years before we think about the 60s civic
Right,
activism. This was
right.
right after World War II. And much of it was led by soldiers, by veterans that came back from Europe being treated fairly
Mhm.
and then come to America and are segregated and didn't stand for it.
Right,
And
right.
so they began a first wave, what we called the double V, the double victory: victory abroad, and then victory against segregation and discrimination in America at home.
Now, it's
And
interesting
so
you
this was a major success story for that effort.
and it's interesting you bring that about because we're there now. We're back at square one, I'd like to say, with the
Yes.
protests, the civil unrest. Um, it's prompted some very interesting conversations, I believe, that extend beyond just police violence against Black men, Black people of
Yes.
color.
Yeah.
Um, it's talked about the economy. It's talked about just the history. It's opened up a real Pandora's box. So, how can we look to the history, as you were just saying, to guide, inform, help us strategize future opportunities for African Americans during this time? What did they do then that we need to be incorporating now?
I think, and I'll talk just some personally on this, and then I think some broader views.
Hmm.
I was really struck by how many people came out in marches. I am, and it's such an interesting time because it's also woven into the coronavirus
Hmm.
pandemic.
Hmm.
So you have this issue of you come out in March, but are you supposed to social distance?
Right.
And
We too mad to worry
it's
about
it's so
it.
and so we participated in a march a couple weekends ago, and everyone's in mass. It's a very different, surreal almost type of scenario.
Mhm.
I'm not from Miami originally, but I grew up here, so I was in high school during the May '80 riots,
Okay.
and had a chance to see all of that. And literally, I mean, my stepdad asked me, he said, "Hey, let's go into the riot zone and really see what's going on."
Oh,
And so
wow.
we did. We got in the
That's
truck and
bold.
and went in to not to participate, but to really see what was going
Mhm.
on. Okay. And you know, that activism, that the anger in the community, it's sad that 40 years later we're seeing it. But I mean,
Mhm.
90% of the people marching weren't old enough to have been in the '80 riot.
Mhm.
And that's both, exciting to me that they're fighting for justice and equality. It's sad that it's
Mhm.
40 years
And we still have to do
later and it's the
still mad.
same thing. I
Uh-huh.
won't call it square Yeah. Now I won't call it square one. I won't say we're back at square one, but it
Okay.
is.
You're right.
There's so much more work that still has to be done, and it's wonderful seeing it happen. It's
Mhm.
wonderful seeing Mississippi drop the Confederate flag
Mhm.
from
Mhm.
the state flag.
Mhm.
I mean, what's happening in Richmond, Virginia right now with the monuments? Some of those things do need to be removed. Now, in functioning with the historic beach park, we're ultimately building a museum here,
Oh, nice.
okay, to tell this story, to educate people, and like you said, to have a role in this civic activism, in what one person can do, what a small group of people wading into the ocean created a legacy of importance and history that lives today. That
Mhm.
one person can make the difference, a group of people can make a larger difference. So some of those things will be in this museum. Also, just the stories of those who fought before. I mean, Athalie Range,
Mhm. Mhm.
powerful figure for the Black community in South Florida, can't be forgotten. Our founding chairperson, and led this fight,
Mhm.
led many for desegregation throughout South Florida. I mean, those notable figures will be remembered through this place. But also, it's a gathering place. That's what it always was. It
Mhm.
was a safe place. It was almost a sanctuary, a spiritual place. Many baptisms were done here, and they're
Oh,
happening today. They
nice.
still take place, and some in huge numbers. And I mean hundreds, baptisms of hundreds of people.
Nice.
And so we've got to maintain that. We've got to maintain that role that this place represents. But it's also something that I believe is going to galvanize the entire island of Virginia Key. The
Absolutely.
island itself is 1,000 acres. We're 82 acres. But I think there's a whole story to be told of this natural barrier island and an
Mhm.
environmental, each person's right to public space.
Mhm.
I mean, in Miami, everything is overdeveloped.
Yeah,
So there's
absolutely.
a fight to hold on to public space, to recreational space. It's understood through science that human beings need open space.
Right.
Human beings need to be able to interact with the ocean.
Yeah.
We have an issue here in South Florida of, you know, no access to water that's largely saved for the affluent.
Right.
Whether your
Absolutely.
home is on a seawall or your condo is oceanfront,
Right.
that has always been an issue across the entire country. And I think what's happening today is we see these protests to the George Floyd issue. It's not just police brutality or
Yeah.
unfairness. There are these things in many different levels of our society. And in the same way women deal with a glass ceiling.
Mhm.
And you say to
There is
yourself,
no glass ceiling for
what is
us.
that? Glass ceiling.
Right.
What's that
That's
supposed to
it.
mean?
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
one of those issues of you just have to stand up and say enough of that.
yeah. Right.
We need to function on an equal and fair basis. Those are things that I think a lot of these marches are starting to touch, and it's outside of just police brutality. I mean, there's
Mhm.
even age discrimination. There's,
Absolutely.
there's a
Absolutely.
scenario, yeah, that young people are this different group of Americans and should be, dealt with differently and
Mhm.
by a status quo.
Mhm.
And they're the next generation. They will forge what they want this country to be and look like. And
Mhm.
I think through the marches we see what that is.
Right.
Okay, we see unity, we see love, we see the fight for freedom and justice. um,
No matter who you are, what's
Peaceful
your color.
gathering,
Yeah, that's
no
true.
matter who you are, what's your color. It's almost like the beach. It's everybody, rich, poor. This is not about one group having a special place or a special circumstance. This is everyone needs to function together. Everyone needs to be, treated equally and fairly.
Well, you kind of touched on something that is actually a couple of things. Actually, I want to talk about. I don't know which one to ask first. So, so you are correct that this should be an equal and fair opportunity. But I think about venues like yours largely gets a lot of attention in Black History Month. So they're sort of, I'm very associated with various venues and historical venues where Black History Month is the month that everybody is very intentional about not only delving into our history, understanding who and what we are, but being willing to pay for it on a regular basis. How do we get, and what are some of the conversations about once we get past March 1st? During this time, can we start to have real intentional action plans where we get everyone to really think about how to invest in patronage, be at venues like yours 365 days? It just becomes an unconscious effort. How do we move that dial along so you are sort of consistently in the mainstream eye for longer than 28 days out of the year?
Sure. And we and I can tell you, we intentionally work on things to do just that. And whether that is inviting other communities, whether it's the Bahamian community, Haitian Americans, Hispanic Americans, other communities that go outside of our Black History Month. There's an African diaspora in all of those communities. Central America, South America, Cuba, all of those places. There's an African diaspora. It's part of what has taken place globally. Some of it, unfortunately, some of it naturally. But when we talk about colonialism, it has brought an African diaspora to Native people that were in South America, Central America, and North America. So we make a point of trying to celebrate and inject those other cultures, history, where it can roll in and be very similar. The struggle that took place for African Americans in South Florida and in saving this beach is one that plays out across the world. And that's both unfortunate, but it also builds a great tie to understanding how you raise up your history. It's American history. It's not Black history.
Right.
It's American history.
Absolutely.
And so it's a part of that. And that's been said many times before and may not have had much behind it. But I think in some of these marches where we talk about Black Lives Matter, folks are understanding. And when I say that, I mean everyone of all colors are understanding how you have to pull for each other. It's not just about this idea of, well, all lives matter. Of course they do. But we're talking about Black Lives Matter because there are issues in this country that have to bring a real focus to Black lives.
Because all lives don't matter if Black lives don't matter, because we're a part of all. So
there you are.
It's got to be all.
For someone not to say Black Lives Matter,
then it's not all.
Is not being inclusive of all lives matter.
Or
you're not. Like, what is the problem with saying that?
Right. So, exactly. Okay, just thought that out.
Exactly.
So now you tapped on,
and I'm glad that you did.
I'm just saying. So you tapped on something that not even is on my list. You talk about beachfront property, and yes, you are correct. In Miami, beachfront property is prime real estate. It's where the wealthier live, and in some cases, it's sort of commandeered as their own personal space. As you know, in this territory, the ocean rising has been at the forefront and the concern of many of our communities, and rightfully so, because quite frankly, there is perception in 25, 50 years, Miami Beach might be underwater, which now makes many African American communities beachfront, which makes them, the
Yeah.
higher elevations tend to be where the
Prime
Black community.
property.
So prime property, which now means everybody's, kind
Prime
of
property.
commandeering on those spaces. So what, you know, have you as a historian and as a part of a collective started to have some of those conversations, and how do we save our history? How do we save our populations under an intentional desire to continue to make beachfront property only for the wealthy and primarily only for the wealthy white?
Yeah, it's this is going to be a difficult battle. There's been talk. We've been talking about it at the trust and with other people, and especially with environmentalists, because we've had to deal with sea level rise front and center.
Mm-hmm.
But for the Black community, and this plays out along all coastal areas, coastal cities, coastal states, wealthy neighborhoods, largely white neighborhoods, were oceanfront. The workforce was inland, close enough to be able to serve those communities.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something in city planning that existed,
Mm-hmm.
largely still exists today. You can go to LA, you can go to different cities where there's really wealthy neighborhoods, and then there will be a poorer Black community or community of color that largely was the workforce, close enough to be able to serve there, not in the suburbs, close enough to those really wealthy areas. Well, now the switch is on, okay, as you brought up.
Because of the environment.
Sea level rise.
Because
of the environment. Now Miami is very unique in that it's one of the, in terms of home ownership of the actual residences, it rates very low in terms of home ownership in the occupied building. So a lot of our communities, and I say the Black communities, a lot of them, people are renting properties. Owner can sell that property to build a high rise, a new condo. We see these neighborhoods, whether it's Wynwood, Little Haiti with Magic City, and other places. You see this development shooting in and you say, wow, that's terrible. It drives out the local neighborhood. Well, it drives them out in two forms. They're either not the owner of the property. They're not the owner of the apartment building.
Absolutely.
Someone else is. Or the market value of their property is now so high, and having largely been starved out of equal opportunity, here comes an opportunity to finally sell your property for a small piece of the pie, if you would. And that's how you can have some of these neighborhoods really change rapidly. So I see that the commissioners in the city of Miami have been fighting to try to create affordable housing, to try to hang on to, and especially the fight that's been going on in Little Haiti. It's how do you allow the culture of that neighborhood to stay if you're removing the people?
Absolutely.
How do you hang on to the people? How do you hang on to them?
And the identity. It was an indigenous population for the Haitian community. Now, does it reflect that anymore? That's a question we have to ask ourselves.
Exactly.
So, okay, we're supposed to be talking about business, aren't we? So, the trust, the trust itself. Have you completed your restoration plan? Are you still in the process of restoration?
We have probably completed, I would say, 90 to 95% of the actual physical restoration of the park. And I say that, and we have restored all of the historic buildings. When we first came onto the property, there had been a mini train. Well, when we arrived, there was no railroad track. There was no train. The carousel building was there, but there was no carousel. And so we've replaced those items. The property itself is going through a transformation of, you asked about, does it look how it did in 1945? And as I said, no, it did not, because we are following today's environmental knowledge, and that's native plants. So we went through a massive project, and part of it with the Army Corps of Engineers, of the invasive exotic species of plants and adding native plants. So the property now, and probably for the last 5 to 10 years, has been made up of 90%, if not more, native plants. And that has come through, I can't even express how much volunteerism has built this place. When you're trying to manage 82 acres with hardly a budget following the economic meltdown, it can only be done by community involvement and people helping us do it. And so, I mean, we had a group, and they still work with us today, Tremendous Miami, who were working on this property before the trust came out, and still do today. They have planted thousands of native plants and have helped us continue to remove exotic plants. It's just like pulling weeds out of your yard at home, only it's 80 plus acres. So you need a lot more hands.
A little bit different.
And it's work, and it's work you have to do by hand. It's hard work, it's hot, but you get to do it in one of the most beautiful locations in Miami. So that has drawn thousands of volunteers.
So the pandemic hit. And you mentioned that a lot of your revenue streams came from events, concerts, family functions, and still today in Miami, and particularly in the city of Miami, we've been very cautious about opening up. At this point, I don't think you can fully open the park completely. What has been your pivot plan? First, I want to ask if, were you able to apply for some of the loans and the grants that were out there? And what are some of your other pivot plan revenue streams that you've either enacted or are going to enact and plan to continue?
Well, we're in a real tough spot there. Since the pandemic, we have not been able to be open. So that has ended revenue from vehicles entering the park. People are banging at the gates wanting to come in, but until this gets to a place where it is considered safe, that happens on a very limited basis. I don't know when large events will be authorized to take place again. I think we're still in the phase 2, which is roughly 10 people gathering. So we are not renting picnic pavilions. We are not having people gathering on the park. All of those types of events are gone. And that's right on down to families renting a picnic pavilion. So we're largely in a holding pattern on that funding stream. We're in the middle of a fundraising event, which is virtual.
Yes, I was going to bring that up.
Anniversary. Our 75th anniversary is August 1st.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And so we're super excited about it. We know a lot of the community is really excited about it. And we were planning a huge concert event on the property because when you're 75, of course, you want everyone to see the place. We've got to do that virtually now.
Yes.
The coronavirus has caused that to have to happen. So there is a way now where we will have a virtual login. It's a wonderful event where you will see the property narrated by Mr. Connolly. He's a historian known here in these parts and has worked with us in the past and will really kind of walk us through the history of the beach. And it's fun. It's a kind of a drinks and cheese, reception that you have your own house party and support the trust at the same time. So those tickets will start flowing on out literally in the next few days. We have started to reach out to folks to buy their ticket, and you will get a wonderful 75th anniversary item, a gift from the trust when you log in, and you'll be in a community of the reception, of saving the park, of helping us continue on our mission. But it's going to be very difficult. And you talk about our pivot. There's been great interest in people coming out to public spaces. And I think if we do, at the very least, loosen up to the phase 2, gathering of 50 people, most of our revenue streams start to come back. We'll have to work a lot harder to see through this tough period. Some of our supporters, folks who can give to the trust to help us with operations. We've got a number of new interesting, it does drive innovations. There are people looking at different ways to hold events that are socially distanced. We're looking at we've all heard it, drive-in theaters and drive-in concerts.
It's awesome. It's awesome. Do that, please.
Yes, and all of those kinds of things are being stirred around. So parts of that is.
Yes, I would do that for sure. I would do that for sure. So.
You talked about grants and some of those things. We're still in a period now where it'll be, it's a difficult one to figure. There are some opportunities that we're looking at to try to grab hold of. It may come through all of the losses in the city going to the state and federal government, almost similar to the same way in Hurricane Irma. Some of our losses, we recoup them through FEMA, through the city of Miami, because this is a city property. So we're still seeing how this will work. Never been in a situation that has been so day to day. We have changes day to day.
Right.
We were excited about reopening the park. We had big crowds in the last 2 weeks that have come through the property, and July 4th weekend was going to be a big one for us. Okay, that would be one of the biggest ones. It'll now be 0. We are closed. Okay, so like the other beaches, we will be closed from the 3rd to the 7th. So it's still something where we keep our energy high. We keep pivoting, as you spoke of. How do you do some things differently? How do you apply for new and different grants? But I also think there's a massive opportunity moving forward on, when it's not just a grant process. And this ties back to the protests. This ties back to how do we integrate our whole country as one? And it's not what dollars are available for what programs and is that history important or not? I think it's obvious that everyone's struggle in America is part of a whole and part of how we move forward in a healthy way, in a healthy society. And so
that's an intentional investment. That's an intentional investment like in others.
Exactly. It's just a very intentional, hey, we have to do this in order for things to progress in a positive and healthy way. And that is respecting and dealing with all cultures, all histories, binding them together, seeing the importance in all of them so that it moves forward in one fabric and not sort of separated, little segmented areas where this gets thrown at this group, but the mass stays here, or even other groups are trying to steer into following the mass and abandoning their own.
Right, absolutely.
Because the money flows somewhere else.
In that direction.
No, it needs to. Yes, and it needs to flow across all the different areas. I think we're getting to a place where that's getting understood.
Absolutely. I agree. So I'm happy to hear those. One of my questions was,
Stephanie, that Stephanie, that was actually my little message to the city of Miami and our funding stream. Okay, that's what that was. Okay.
I kind of thought that was it,
You
but
might have been feeling that a little bit. That's what
I
that
see
was
what
about.
happened. I
Okay.
see what happened. We'll make sure this gets in the right hands.
There we go. Okay.
That's funny. That's funny. Um, so your emergency plan, as you mentioned before, we've had the pandemic is a different special dynamic. I've definitely learned from this show that nonprofit organizations seem to be a little bit better at having an emergency plan, primarily that's really based on hurricane situations. How do you stay afloat during those temporary situations? Does the trust have an emergency plan, and are you revisiting that emergency plan as we speak right now, to consider larger, more catastrophic circumstances?
I've got to say, I'm going to answer the second one first, which is yes, we are revisiting our emergency plan. This is unlike hurricanes. We were closed for 17 days during Hurricane Irma. And that seemed like an eternity. It seemed like an eternity when 80% of your revenue comes from being open.
Right.
And I think any business owner today can, relate to that concept.
Mm-hmm.
That if you aren't open, you cannot generate revenues, and that stretches across the board to the employees who are there and what their revenues are like and their financial situation. So you try to maintain things and keep things steady and not be in a panic mode.
Right.
We are revisiting it, and that it can happen through a number of different ways. We've been working, our future plans are a museum on this property.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in a good situation in that regard because the dollars to build it are there. Mm-hmm. There's $20.5 million from the county general obligation bond to physically build the structure. But I think we all know, if somebody gives you a gift of a $20 million mansion, if you can't afford to keep it up, you can't.
Right.
Can't
Absolutely.
Do it. Okay?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, absolutely. So we're happy that a year ago, we're actually in July, so we're almost on the 1-year anniversary of the city of Miami unanimously voting to fund the museum for the first 10 years when the doors open.
Okay.
And so yes, I love your expression. It's been mine. And so that's just, to me, that is the city saying that is a year ago. That is before these protests and the sort. That is the city saying this is important to the fabric of our city. We need to support a place that tells those stories.
Right.
And so our challenge now, and we're finalizing the scope of work for the design and planning consultant that will begin to move this process forward. And it's a lengthy process. There's planning, there's permitting, then there's construction. We're talking about probably 3 years for those who have built buildings or built a house or what have you. And know any project takes time, but that portion of it is probably 3 to 3.5 years away from walking into a building. And so we're trying to work behind the scenes, regardless of whether or not the coronavirus is slowing down revenues today. If your mind isn't working 3, 5, and 7 years in the future, you'll find yourself in trouble. So we're still working to the future, to the opening of the museum. In those 1, 2, and 3 year steps, revenue will come. Things will become normalized in whatever that new pattern looks like. And we'll be here to adjust and conform to that so that we keep our eye on the prize, which is building the museum at this point. I mean, we opened the park to the public. We get over 100,000 visitors a year. We'd like to see that get even higher. But it's used, it's known, and people love the space and love that it's been reopened to them. So we keep our eyes on staying afloat month to month, like
Right.
most people do.
And most people right now.
We're looking at that museum.
Right.
Like most people right now, it's
Right.
how do you keep the lights on? But the plan is that museum and telling this story.
Okay. So before we go, I really wanted to make sure, first of all, I want to say thank you. This has been very actually educational for me. And I know we were supposed to solely be talking about business, but nope, we got some good history in there. So thank you for that. I would also like to find out, how do we find you? How do we get others to find you and help you and make sure they come and check you out when we can open up once again?
Well, they definitely need to, one, of course, go to our website. I mean, I think the news right now, it's very interesting what has happened. I mean, there were many people who were getting their news from a lot of different places, whether it was social media. We were watching a lot of news outlets and newspapers and whatnot drop down. I think now people are a little more tuned in to what's happening next, even if it's just whether or not you should wear a mask or not. Okay. Is a curfew on or not?
Right.
So you kind of check in every couple of days to know whether or not you're doing things properly.
Right.
But visit us, virginiakeybeachpark.net. That's virginiakeybeachpark.net. Visit us at HVKBMP. So that's for Historic Virginia Key Beach Museum Park. And that site is finally tuned in to our 75th anniversary. Go there, take a look at that, participate with us August 1st, and we'll really be surging on that now. It's 30 days away, and so we want everyone to log in, join our reception. That'll help support us. You can give donations there, of course, but we also just want the public, whether we're all still at home a month from now or have the opportunity to move around and maybe visit the park on August 1st. That's a Saturday. And believe me, we saw that some years out and said, boy, are we going to have a big party at the beach for the 75th birthday. Even though there's Corona, we're still going to do it online. So we want as many people as possible to join us there.
Can you say that last website really quickly again? Because there was a bit of a glitch and I want to make sure everybody gets that because I want you all tuning in. Did you say that last website really quick?
The second one it's hvkbmp.org.
Okay. Thank you so much. Again, we will definitely be putting that information out. And y'all have a good day. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us again today. That was a wonderful experience because I learned some stuff and I'm going to buy my ticket now. We will be pushing the ticket information out as well. You will find it through Going Overtown, which is a newsletter we send out weekly. Please sign up for it at goingovertown.org. We will be sending that out regularly just to make sure you know more about it. And we also share all things that are happening at the Historic Virginia Key Beach. So thank you again. Tune in with us next Tuesday, which we'll have a special show on that day. Thank you for tuning in, and y'all have a great weekend. Happy July 4th. And hope you have a great time for our Independence Day. Have a good day.